And Boko Haram is not the only concern facing the new Nigerian president. Low oil prices, as we mentioned, will also be on Muhammadu Buhari's mind as he takes over the resource-rich nation. The ongoing talks in Lausanne could have a significant impact on oil prices. An agreement and a possible lifting of economic sanctions would unlock Iran's huge economic potential. I'm joined now by our emerging markets editor, John Defterios in Abu Dhabi. And John, everyone is watching the nuclear talks very closely, many hoping that a deal would allow Iranian crude to flow into the market. How exactly is the extension of talks impacting oil prices?
Well, Lynda, if we had this conversation last week, it would have been the theme around Yemen and the security concerns driving prices higher, in fact, considerably higher. Right now, the market is reflecting the fact that a deal with Iran perhaps is imminent. It's good to remember that right now under the sanctions that Iran can only export 1 million barrels a day. If a deal comes through, that could change radically. Let's take a look. The intense discussions that have unfolded in Lausanne have undermined what was only a tepid price recovery since the start of 2015. The mere prospect of having sanctions lifted on Iran's oil exports has capped any gains prompted by Middle East security concerns, especially in Yemen. Iran's petroleum minister is ambitious, wanting to increase exports by 1 million barrels a day within 3 to 4 months.
We think that Iran could add something like another 800,000 barrels a day to the market within, let's say 6 to 9 months. And it could release also oil from storage within a period of 1 to 3 months after sanctions are eased. And that obviously in an oversupplied market is going to push prices even lower.
Iran's potential re-emergence could not come at a worse time for energy producers. The big 3 global players in the world today have not trimmed their sails despite falling prices. OPEC heavyweight Saudi Arabia is producing close to 10 million barrels a day. Russia is nearly at the same rate, focusing on new Asian customers. And the United States has so much oil, it is nearly out of storage capacity. Iran, if it can open the door wide open to investment, could move up the league table of the energy giants around the world. After a few years of very tight sanctions on the oil and banking sectors, the country is starved for cash and the technology know-how of the European and U.S. oil companies.
It's a country and its oil and gas sector very much needs an injection of new technology, and it will need an injection of capital as well, because obviously the financial situation of Iran has been badly affected by sanctions.
But Iran could be a sizable force. It has the 4th largest oil reserves at 157 billion barrels, 18% of proven gas reserves, and just 4 years ago was producing 4.3 million barrels a day.
It could be a huge player. It could be in gas. It could be as big as Qatar. In oil, it can be a truly second place in OPEC. If Iran comes on now and can get the right investment, it can become a very, very strong player in OPEC indeed.
And medium term, with Iran and Iraq more closely aligned politically, with combined proven reserves larger than Saudi Arabia, it could challenge the supremacy of the kingdom in oil. And let's not forget, with the Saudis now mounting troops on the border of Yemen because of what's taking place there, and the airstrikes as well, with the Iranian support for the Houthis, this is where Iran's rise in the global economy gets very complicated and has people here quite nervous about how fast it can rise if it's allowed to produce oil to 4 to 5 million barrels a day in the next few years, Lynda.
No doubt. But, I mean, should the talks fail, are there any contingencies in place if the talks fall through?
I would say there is no plan B right now, and we have, let's not forget, a timeline till the end of June. There's a few things to look out for near term. First and foremost, would Iran be allowed to export as much oil as it wants to? It's capped right now at 1 million barrels a day. Prior to the sanctions, it was 2.5 million barrels a day. It had its production of 4.3 million barrels a day. It wants to target 5 by the end of the decade. Number 2, the banking sanctions right now really limit Iran's economy from growing. First and foremost, they're shut out of the SWIFT global transaction package because of the European Union and U.S. sanctions. Will they be lifted entirely? And also whether the sanctions will be phased out or lifted right away. There's a trust factor here. The Iranians want the sanctions lifted right away. The IAEA and the P5+1 want to be able to monitor Iran going forward. And finally, and this is another wild card here, will the U.S. Congress continue to introduce new legislation. There's a bill coming up in mid-April that would handcuff the White House, how far they can go with Iran. And then we're even seeing the Senate Majority Leader suggesting a new bill that would put additional sanctions on Iran if a deal is not struck to the U.S. liking by the end of June as well. So it's much more complex than we see in Lausanne in the last hours of those negotiations. Lynda?
Yeah, sanctions are a huge key sticking point. John Defterios, thank you very much.